I know the Japanese like to say that getting older is a gift. Some days getting older just really sucks. Mac Engel, Engel Angle Podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to upsell this one a lot. I have been fortunate enough in my life to have interviewed some really fascinating, interesting, and high-profile people. Aaron Sorkin, Kevin Costner, Jane Fonda. I actually corrected Jane Fonda about my name. She called me Mark, and I said, no, actually it's Mac. And I never correct anybody about my name. And for some reason in that moment, I thought, you know, Jane Fonda, you're not going to call me Mark. You can put some respect on that. And the funny part was when I told her that, she said, oh, it was over the phone. And she, oh. And in that moment, it dawned on me, I could have been the Pope. I could have been Jesus Christ. I could have been Satan. She couldn't have cared less that I was Matt, Mark, Jesus Christ, the devil, or anybody else. This guy that I'm interviewing for this episode was somebody that I stumbled across after I went down a YouTube rabbit hole of one of my favorite topics, and that is 1980s action flicks. I am a sucker for all of it. First Blood, Commando, anything with Schwarzenegger, anything with Stallone, Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, love Lethal Weapon, 48 Hours by Walter Hill. I like all the Walter Hill movies. I even like Red Heat. I liked all that stuff. And I see on the right side, there's a clip from a movie. I was like, oh, wait a minute. I haven't seen that in forever. I liked that movie so much, I went and saw it in the theater twice. Because that's how many friends I had. I'm talking Extreme Prejudice, a Walter Hill film starring Nick Nolte. And I'm watching these scenes. I'm like, oh, I forgot how good this was. And then I went and watched the whole thing. I thought, this is pretty good. But it didn't have big box office success. For whatever reason. I don't know why. It was good. But it had all these people. And I couldn't believe it. Powers Booth. Tiny Lister was in it. William Forsythe. And it, like I said, it was really good. It's super violent, but it was really good. But there's one guy in it, and I thought, he kind of looks familiar. Who is that? So I go on IMDb, and I look it up on IMDb, see this one guy, but it doesn't have his photo, which is really odd for IMDb. And I click on it, and I start scrolling down his resume, and it's really impressive. And I say this because having covered a little bit of entertainment, I have come to appreciate just how hard it is to make it in Hollywood. We always hear the story about the guy who sleeps in his car and then he becomes a massive, celebrity. The story about Matt LeBlanc before he got Friends. He was down to like his last $10. Matthew McConaughey lived in his car. We hear these stories, but we don't hear about the guys who never make it. And because that's how hard it is to make it. I had an actor who once told me that of the people who have their Screen Actors Guild cards, 6%, give or take, can call themselves working actors or directors, in that they can support themselves just through that job. Everybody else is supplementing their income in some other way, shape, or form, because that's how hard it is. Let me get back to this guy. I'm scrolling up and down his resume, and I see it. I was like, this guy had a hell of a career. He starred in Biloxi Blues. He's got a big role in Extreme Prejudice, which is like I said, the big action movie. He goes on to have a 4-year run, 96 episodes on a CBS television sitcom called Major Dad. 96 episodes. No one makes 96 episodes of anything anymore unless it's another Law and Order, which, by the way, this guy had a role on. And this guy was a working actor. And then in 2005, he writes and directs in a film that Roger Ebert called one of the best films of 2005. That's how I found it. And I do highly recommend, if you get the opportunity, find the movie Duane Hopwood. It's very good. It's very good, and it's starring former Friends star David Schwimmer. He's the title actor in it. Also in it, Janeane Garofalo, Dick Cavett, and John Krasinski, right before he became John Krasinski. And as I continue to scroll down this person's page, I noticed that he is a professor of history at Fordham University. He decided to leave the business. This guy, to me, is a big success. Even if his name isn't on the marquee, even if he doesn't have a bunch of awards or anything along those lines, the reward and the award for doing these jobs is making enough to be able to support yourself while doing what you love. That's the award to me, and he did it. Fascinating career, super smart guy, really interesting. Please let me introduce you to Mr. Matt Mulhern. So I want to go back when you were a kid and when you were thinking about pursuing theater, Hollywood, acting. Matt, did anybody in that time window say, oh my God, do not do this. All it is heartbreak. Don't waste your time?
My mother.
Did you really?
My dad was in the music business, and he was one of the guys who started A&M Records, and he was specifically
wow,
kind of an A&R guy, so like a talent guy. And he didn't say this to me much, but he'd seen me in a few things when I was back in high school, and I could tell that because he would have told me. He was a straight shooter, but my mom was just, they were World War II generation people, and she wanted me to do other things, not necessarily be a lawyer or a doctor. She thought my talents lay more in writing. So she would have been happy if I'd gone somewhere down that road. But anyway, in terms of other people, that's the standard response you get from everybody in the beginning. I remember being at a wedding once, and I hadn't really gotten started as an actor, and a guy said to me, well, what's plan B? And I said, there is no plan B. And I think, people who go into it with that attitude probably have a better chance. I didn't know how to do anything else. I didn't want to do anything else. And I was just going to make it, work, and it was tough. The first few years were very, very tough, psychologically, to be back at home back in 1983, working at a factory in North Jersey. Wow. Literally, my first big break was a play called Biloxi Blues, which was done on Broadway. And I was working on the assembly line of the factory, and the producers would call the assembly line, and I would, be given the phone to be told that I had a callback, and that went on for 3 or 4 or 5 callbacks, and then eventually I got the part. But there's a lot of very sensible advice, that you get from people in the beginning. And that's what I got, like everybody who goes into it. It's a tough business.
So when you had that part of your life, did you have any moments where you felt like, even though you had the support of your family, even though you had a job and all those things, did you feel like, man, I'm a failure?
I would say I felt like that once I had started working, and in those downtime, because once you're married and you have a couple of kids and you've got bills to pay, it's a different thing, It's a job. And again, it wasn't like I could just sort of sidestep into some other career. I was really wholly unqualified for anything else. So those were the times, in the beginning you're young and got this job, this play, Biloxi Blues, and I became friends with Matthew Broderick and Alan Ruck, and Woody Harrelson was my understudy, and we became good friends. And it was just like, I'm in New York in this dive apartment in Hell's Kitchen, and everything's great, everything's great, and I'm on the road. But it can later in your career be a very isolating, profession. Between jobs, it's tough.
So when you mentioned that you had an opportunity to work with guys who would become really established names in theater and film. Woody Harrelson, Ruck, certainly Matthew Broderick. And I heard a story about a teacher who had worked with Tom Hanks when Tom Hanks, I think, was a teenager. And the teacher said, this guy's it. He just knew it. When you work with those guys, did you see any inkling? They're like, man, these guys have got it. There's something about them that's going to translate to commercial success. Or is it one of those trajectories that people who say that they saw it coming are full of it, that they don't know? It happens, and some of it's luck.
Well, Matthew was a big star
Yeah.
already, and it was very clear upon meeting him and getting to know him that he just, what you see when you watch him, there's something compelling about it. And when you hang out with him, he's the same way. He's funny, he's really smart, and he's just a little different. He's got a thing. And I would say the same was true of Woody. Even though Woody, when I first met him, they brought the understudies in after we had been rehearsing for a few weeks. And I look, at this rehearsal space, and there's this guy sitting like 5 feet away from me. And I think I had heard that he was understudying me and one other part. And he was reading a book. And I don't remember what the book was, but it was a real piece of literature. And he had glasses on that were missing one lens, right? It turned out later that he had a stigma, he told me, and he had just lost, but he couldn't afford to get new glasses. Woody was, I haven't seen him in a long, long time, but we were very close for a while. He was one of the groomsmen in my wedding. And he clearly was a guy that was, something was going to happen, It wasn't necessarily that he was going to become a movie star. It might be that he drove off a bridge or something. He was a pretty wild guy, but he very clear. He just had an energy that was sort of unmatched, and he was a very compelling guy to be around.
You did theater. How long was the run that you did Biloxi Blues? How long did you perform in that show?
It was about a year from the beginning of rehearsals. We went out to Los Angeles at the Amundsen Theater, and then we went to San Francisco, I want to say the Curran Theater, and then we came into New York. So it was the typical, especially for Neil Simon, out of town tryout, and then into New York. But all in, it was about a year.
So I was watching, I stumbled upon a podcast that Jason Alexander did. And Jason Alexander was the guy who did Seinfeld, and he had been theater trained, and he's interviewing Wayne Knight. And Wayne had obviously had the famous part on Seinfeld where he played Newman. And both those guys did theater. And they were talking about at some point during a theater run, where you're doing X amount of shows a week, you turn into a zombie. And it's not miserable. Misery is relative. But it gets really, really hard. For the viewer and the consumer, you go see it one time, well, it's amazing, it's incredible. But for the performer, it does seem really redundant. And you just you want to do anything other than what you're doing. Did you have that experience at all in the theater where you're like, oh my God, get me out of here. I'll do a toothbrush commercial. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. I went to school for it. I studied with a great teacher. Mm-hmm. So I was really, theater based, started out in the theater. And long runs are where the rubber meets the road. And for me, a long run was really anything over like a month. If I rehearsed for a month and then I've done the play 8 times a week for a month, I'm ready to leave. So recreating your performance every night and being present, and that's what it's really about. That's really what the way I was taught, the training that I got was it's moment to moment. And as long as you lock into your fellow actors and they're, on the same page as you, you can do it every night, but it's hard, it is hard. I did national tour of Death of a Salesman, playing Biff opposite Hal Holbrook, and doing a 3-hour tragedy all over the country. There were some afternoons where I realized I had to go to the theater, where I was just like, maybe if I just get in that rental car,
Just keep
I mean,
going.
I could be home in 9 hours, and I don't know, maybe we'll just work it out. So there were times that I really kind of had to, kind of drag myself to the theater. Like, no, it's not professional. But yeah, I would say the hardest thing in my experience being a professional actor was doing shows 8 times a week in relatively long runs, 6 months, a year, stuff like that.
So when you go back to the 80s and you're starting out of Rutgers, I'm sure you got jobs that paid nothing. I always love asking guys this question because it puts it in proper perspective of the people who do this and how little they get paid. This job's included actor, anybody under the entertainment umbrella. So when you think back about that, Matt, what was the lowest paid job that you took? And do you remember how much it was?
Well, I did the typical thing. I waitered in New York City. Um, I was actually a chef at one point, which was hysterical because I didn't know how to cook. But a
You
friend
just
of mine,
make it up?
yeah, just another actor, he was working as a pastry chef at a really good restaurant on in the city. And he's like, yeah, I can teach you how to do it. So the real chefs were these Chinese guys who worked like around the corner in their section of the kitchen, the hot chefs.
Yeah.
And all I learned from that job, and my friend taught me this, was how to bank cherry tomatoes off the wall so that it would hit the Chinese cooks in the head and just drive them insane. That's the only tangible skill. I mean, I could put together a salad, but I never really learned how to bake anything. As far as low low wage, everything was low wage. Everything was
No.
low. I'd had, I don't know, 15 jobs before I started working as an actor. A lot of minimum wage stuff, factory work, labor jobs. But once I got started, the money, kind of mainstream, uh, off Broadway theater jobs, Broadway minimum, you still can't make a living in New York. You can't afford housing in New York, even with Broadway minimum today. Um, but
Wow.
relatively speaking, it seemed like a fortune to me at the time. I was like, wow, seriously, you want to repeat that? Um, but I would say, some of the lower paying jobs I ever had were, regional work as an actor. I worked at a bunch of regional theaters around the country, but usually, you're doing those parts because I already had a career going, because it's a part you want to do, and you'd only get to play X part, in La Jolla, or
Huh.
uh, up at Huntington Rep in Boston or something like that. So maybe between seasons of a TV job or something like that, go off and do some regional work. And it's not about the money, for sure.
So let's go back to the 80s. You land a part in this big time Hollywood action flick. It doesn't look at your resume at the time. You fit the action genre, certainly the way action movies are made that day. And I'm thinking Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, all this stuff. It's got Nick Nolte and Powers Booth and William Forsythe and all these other guys. And now they make this movie, and I thought it, like I said, I thought it was pretty good and it held up. So you star in it, in which you kill everybody. This everybody gets shot up, and then you see it as a film goer. You see it. Did you think it was good when you all made it?
Well, when we made it, it was very, very clear to me that a sense of humor was not something they were looking for me to imbue my part with.
Yeah.
Walter Hill, it's not that he wasn't a funny guy and everybody didn't have a sense of humor, but this stunt coordinator kept like when I try to like act, he'd be like, don't do that shit. You know, just shoot him. And
What were you doing that he told you not to do?
I was trying to like have a moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, uh, boy, we're killing all these people. Is that a bad thing? So, I'm overstating it, but I was trying to bring some humanity to the guy, and it's like, no, don't do that. Um, because I was an actor, and I'd come out of New York, so I was trying to flesh out the part. Um, but I had a ball. I mean,
Did you really?
I had a ball, and my wife, I was not married to at the time, she came to the set, and she hung out for a weekend out in El Paso, and we got back to the hotel, and I said, "Well, what do you think?" And she just started chanting, "Men, men, men, men." It would talk about a testosterone fueled
Oh.
set.
Did you know, like at the end of that movie, and the reason why I fell into it was the sequence, the finale to that movie is as good as any action scene I've ever seen. Now, it's ridiculous, obviously, but at one point, and there's some, it does obviously it's sort of a modern western, which is one of the reasons why I thought it held up. But when you were filming that scene, and the actor, stunt coordinator says, "Okay, now Matt, you're going to go run behind these two gigantic." Um, massive machine guns that normally would be on a helicopter, and you're going to fire away and kill everybody. Did anybody during the production say, "Wait a minute, this is ridiculous," or is everybody all in and like, "Let's do it"?
Everybody was all in.
Really?
There weren't a lot of questions being asked at that point. I just, I knew what he was going for, and actually, I remember Walter Hill saying what you said. He did want to kind of make this connection between a typical, shoot 'em up Western and bring it into a modern context. But yeah, at that point, it was kind of just fun. There was a real element when we were shooting that sequence, to just, okay, this is just your unbridled, craziest self. And it was just like, how do you die? How do you die? I get machine gunned. The tough part was after it came out, my dad took my younger sister, who was young at the time, to see it.
How
And
young?
she cried. She was 4 years old. And, when I get machine gunned to death, my dad was like, "Oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have brought Nora to see
So
this."
when I've seen that movie and I see, like I said, I'm a big fan of that genre. And I've wondered about this really in the last couple of weeks. I'd seen a movie on Netflix. It's an action movie called Rebel Ridge. And it's got Don Johnson and a British actors. And it's pretty good. It's pretty good. But it is a movie that is set up to be an action flick like a Sylvester Stallone 80s movie. But they didn't go down that route. And I thought, well, I haven't seen many of those kinds of movies anymore, even though we societally are totally desensitized to graphic images for a variety of reasons. Do you have any theory, Matt, why we don't see those kinds of action movies today? We see horror movies now the way they were once made, but we don't see the action genre really live up to the standards that you all did and these films kind of did back in the 80s. Any reason why?
I'm out of the business since 2015, so you know, I maybe would hear these kinds of things in audition rooms with other actors, but I'm not in that environment anymore. I don't know. I don't know if sometimes the liberal Hollywood thing I think is really overstated, but maybe there are people in control of the purse strings who just don't want to keep that that image coming out of Hollywood. I don't know. Because violence really sells. It really sells, and it really resonates. And everybody seems to love it. I'm at the point now as a viewer where really excessive violence does kind of get under my skin. Like I was watching what's the Yellowstone spinoff with Tim McGraw.
Oh, like was it 1883 or 19? The guy who makes that is a Fort Worth guy, coincidentally, and I know what you're talking about. I
Yeah,
don't know which spinoff,
like,
but I know what you're talking about.
it was like,
Yep.
wow, is that the only story about the expansion of the West? Because it's, as a history teacher now, the stories, the truth of the matter is so compelling. in terms of American history, that I really don't think. Like I was reading recently about Ridley Scott's pushback to the film Napoleon,
Mm-hmm.
and Napoleon didn't shoot cannons at the pyramids, and he's like, well, were you there? And of course, now teaching history at Fordham, the response is no, but there were people who were, and they
Right.
wrote down where he was and what he did, which is fascinating. So why do you have to over dramatize what's already incredibly compelling if you tell it, in the right way?
So you mentioned purse strings in Hollywood, and you led me down a question that I have wondered about for a while. And I don't know how many streaming apps you have, like Hulu or HBO Max or any of those things, but I go up and down them sometimes, and I'm sure you can relate to the Friday night blockbuster movie scroll experience back in the 80s, and you just walk around them forever, can't figure out what you want to buy, you rent, and the streaming thing is the same experience. And the one thing I see, Matt, is just there's a million choices, and I'm like, how do any of these movies make any money now? Because there's so many of them, and they're barely in theaters. And I know you were out of it for 9 or 10 years. Matt, how do any of these things make any money today?
I was watching Wolves last night, which is the new Clooney Pitt movie.
Yeah, yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was watching with my wife, and I said, how long was this in the theater? Like 10 minutes. Here it is on whatever it is, Netflix or Amazon, or maybe it's Apple.
It's Apple, yeah.
Apple. And I'm thinking, I don't know, between the two of them and their salaries and the production values, it's got to be $100 million, right? Minimum. And
Seriously?
I would think so. I mean, unless the two of them are like, yeah, let's have some fun.
Right.
And I'll
Yeah.
But on the face of it, they're going to be paid. Again, I'm out of it, but I would think $30 million each up front, and maybe have a piece of the back end because they're both producers. So to be honest, I don't know. My son's an actor, and
Yeah.
he gives me the new stuff. He was actually in a movie called Boys in the Boat that Clooney directed.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
a great book. It's a great movie.
Played a character, a guy named Don Hume, who gets very sick when he goes to Berlin, and he's barely able to get in the boat. But the story that he told me about, because when he got the job, I said, "That's it. You're good, unless you have some horrendous car crash debacle in your personal life. You're going to be good. This is a big movie. Clooney does a great job as a director. It's going to be big." Well, it turns out that the studio they made it for got bought by Amazon before they started shooting and tried to pull the plug. They didn't
Oh, I didn't
want
know that.
George Clooney, Boys in the Boat, this incredibly popular novel
Yeah.
that was just waiting to be made into a major motion picture for 20 years since the book came out, and not a lot of support. That there, this is what I'm talking about. Like when we were talking about violence in movies,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't figure that out. I thought, wait a minute, Clooney, Boys in the Boat, he's directing it. How can anybody say no to this? But they tried to. They just thought, no, nobody cares. Rowing, who cares? Who cares? And thank God the movie came out, but it had to be rearranged financially to get made. So yeah, those stories I get from my son now, and it's really, really interesting. Business
Do
is
you
king.
feel the same way about it? Like in terms of, you're good. You've hit the role that you need to sort of have stable footing under you for a career. Do you, even though the Amazon thing happened, do you still feel that way for your son about you're on good footing? You're a part of a big project. You're working with a really established name guy, or is the financial uncertainty of all this stuff say to you, son, I don't know what to tell you. This is a different world.
It's a combination of both. He grew up obviously with me, so he knew about the downtimes. But he's just a guy who was all in like I was when he found it, when he started getting cast in some stuff in college. It was like, this is it. I was lost, and now I'm found, He's been in some other good stuff. He had a good role in an HBO series called Mayor of Easttown.
Yeah, it was a good show. Yeah.
Did an opioid thing with Broderick, which was really funny for Broderick, a friend to work with my son, called Painkillers. I think it was
Oh.
maybe show. I'm not sure what that was on. So he's got a good career. So I'm very supportive of him, and I feel like he's in a good position. But at the same time, I don't have to tell him. He knows. He's experienced some slow times. He's 30, and he gets it. So one of the things that's changed about the business, which I really applaud, is he's going to get a master's in theology. He's really interested in theology and philosophy, and he just got accepted to a program. When I was doing it, you were at the beck and call of the industry 24/7, 365. You had to live in New York or Los Angeles, or you were not serious. And if your agent called and you had an audition and you said, I'm on a Zoom class for a theology degree, you didn't have an agent the next morning. The business is changing, and him and the guys that he runs around with, who are, some young working actors, some really talented guys, they get their jobs off tape. I always had to go in 2, 3, 4 times for Human Beings. They all get their jobs off tape, sometimes one tape. I think he got Boys in the Boat off of. And there just seems to be in their generation a sense of, I'm not going to sit around and wait 6 months or a year and not do anything else. And I think that's healthy. I think that's really good. And I encourage him with that.
So he gets to work with George Clooney, and I think anybody in these kinds of jobs, and I throw my own job in it too, but certainly with yours. Can you recall, Matt, a moment that you had when you were younger that was sort of one of those quiet, validating moments from somebody you really respected, looked up to, had been on the TV screen and the movie screen that you had seen, and now all of a sudden you're opposite that person? And they gave it to you subtly. It's not something you put on a LinkedIn profile or a resume or anything like that, but it was something from somebody else that you held in the highest regard that they said to you that even now, if you're not feeling great about yourself, you have that moment and that experience to say, wow. It's not like Sally Field saying, you love me, you really love me, but it's that kind of emotional pop to your self-esteem.
Yeah, I had a few of those, and they were really, really meaningful. It just means the world.
Yeah.
When I was doing the film of Biloxi Blues, Mike Nichols was directing it, and
Wow.
it was intimidating at first. But I was very, very comfortable from the beginning because I'd done the play for a year. Some of the other guys were not in the play, and I could right away I could feel like I just felt comfortable. I felt like I know what I'm doing. I think I know this script better than he does, to be honest. And it was just a lot of fun. I got to work with Broderick again, and I got to work with Chris Walken for the second time, and one of my favorite actors. And I don't know, there's a bunch of them, but I remember after the screening, Walken got up from the other side of the theater and came around, and he walked up to me and he just went, and that was it. Didn't say anything, and then left. And I thought, it's one of those. Well, kill me now, because I thought I was okay. And
Yeah.
that for me, that was enough for me.
So you wrote and directed a really good movie, Duane Hopwood, starring David Schwimmer. It had Janine Garofalo in it, but there was one person in it, and I had to do a triple take because I couldn't believe he was in it, and that was Dick Cavett. Now, for this generation and probably the last couple generations, they don't know that for a long time, Dick Cavett was one of America's foremost talk show hosts, and wonderfully understated and whip smart. You wrote and directed this movie. How did you get him to be in it?
Yeah, it was suggested to me by maybe the casting director, a wonderful casting director who's done a lot of big mainstream movies, Cindy Tolan. She said, what about Dick Cavett? And I said, well, does he act? And she said, oh, he was on Broadway and our picture show. And then I became aware that he had done some acting. And I thought, yeah, okay, I can see that. And then of course he came in and he was just great. I mean, he was great. He was very receptive. He wasn't standoffish. There was no unease because he'd been this and now he was in South Jersey on this low budget movie. He gave everything he had, and you know, and I think he did a terrific job. Just it's so great, to have actors who take what you wrote and they just elevate it, and they give you not only what you really hoped for, but more. And I got a lot of that in that movie from a lot of different people, and he was one of them. Yeah, so it was a hoot working with Dick Cavett.
So one of the people in that movie, and I don't know if you've seen this interview or not, you had John Krasinski in that. And John Krasinski did an interview with Stephen Colbert. I don't know how long ago this was, Matt, maybe 8 or 10 years. And he's telling the story that, he had told his mom when he was younger, I'm going to move to New York and I'm going to make my dream happen. I'm going to see if I can do it. And he's waiting tables. He's not making any money. And he calls his mom and he says, okay, time to come pick me up. It's time to go home. I think maybe home was Boston. I don't know. And his mom said, I can't do that. You just give it a 6 more months or whatever else. And that was right around the time you would have been making this film. And at right around the time he got The Office, which obviously is what launched him to the status that he enjoys now. Were you aware of any of that when this filming was going on?
Yeah, I was. I was given tapes of guys auditioning for that part, and he just jumped out. Again,
Mhm.
he was a guy who there were some other really good actors auditioning for that role, but when I looked at Krasinski, I was like, "That's it. That's the guy. He's gonna bring humor to it, which very few other guys did in their audition, and he's smart." And I cast him, and he came down and he told me right away about The Office. And to be quite honest, I thought that's great. I don't know, is that going to work in America? You know what I mean? It was such
Yes.
a big show
Yeah.
in Britain and was
Yep.
shown all over the U.S. Really, a remake, an American remake, but of course it exploded, and I'm really happy for him. Proud of John. He's a solid guy, a wonderful actor. Also writes and directs. Obviously, he's made some wonderful movies with the Quiet movies. I'm really proud of him because I know it was one of his first jobs. But I was aware when he was down there.
So when you wrote that script and then you eventually get it to screen, write it, direct it, and then you have an idea of what it's going to look like, and then you watch it. Was it what you envisioned? Because I thought it was really good, and I know it didn't make $1 billion because nothing does unless it's Top Gun 5.
Yeah,
But was it what you envisioned when you put pen to paper?
yeah, I would say yes. The editing process, it's an amazing process. I made another movie before that called Walking to the Waterline,
Mhm.
um, that got even less exposure. But in the editing room, first of all, one of the things, I don't know if it was because I was an actor, but I knew that I had what I needed. I knew that I got the takes and the performance out of everybody. Um, and there wasn't going to be any section where I felt a little worried about that. The things I was worried about were we shot on 16 millimeter, which nobody does anymore. Um, and in some takes there were some focus problems, and sometimes we couldn't get all the coverage we needed, but I was able to patch it together in the editing room, and I knew that it was going to be a very performance driven movie. And yes, it didn't make any money. My disappointment about it is mainly for David because, David was trying to do something there. I think Variety said that it would be his Good Girl. Jennifer
Wow.
Aniston called The Good Girl, and it was a small indie, and she just did it, man. She was great, and the movie was a sweet movie, and she went right into a feature career. And when I was advocating, let me put it that way, for a wider release of that movie, I just felt like they were missing an opportunity. You know, this guy has a career in him as an actor in features. He's a wonderful dramatic actor, and you can see it in that movie. He's got so much to give. And to be honest, I still don't get it. It's like that's David's doing fine. You know, we're still
Yeah.
friends. I speak to him much, but I see him every once in a while, and he's fine. But I thought that was my big hope for it. To be honest, for me, great, that would have been great. But I thought this is going to really open things up for David, and unfortunately, it didn't.
So when I was, there have been films that have been made in the area, and I've done some interviews with producers about the process. And I was told repeatedly that if you're going to make a movie that works, makes money, you've got to have a name attached to it. Like you mentioned, the Clooney Pitt thing, and that's why they got all this money up front, probably. That you don't have any chance to get anywhere without those names. And the names know it. And that's why sometimes you hear on these big projects, the actor or actress could have a lot of influence on the final product, whether it's a shot, a rewrite, or whatever, because they know they're the oomph behind the project. And you hear horror stories about it, about rewrites, and the actor saying, "Oh, I'm going to be the good guy," or whatever else. And all your experience with films, did you ever go through that where the big hitter on set said, "We're not doing this," and the director, and maybe even you ran into it, the director's like, "Okay, this is what we're doing. Great idea."
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of that. I didn't see a lot of that. Schwimmer was not like that at all. You know, he was he. I said to him, I went out to Chicago to meet him because that's where he spends a lot of time and grew up. And we had a dinner and we talked. I'd never met him before. I didn't tell him I auditioned for your part in Friends.
You did?
Did, yeah. And they were like, he was really good, but he's too old to be a friend. I didn't bother with that. You know, it was still at the height of Friends in their 10th season. But, I I don't want to talk anybody down. I don't want to talk out of school. I've been on some jobs as an actor where I saw actors throw their weight around,
Mhm.
and it's just unnecessary. You know, it's unnecessary. It's never called for. There are guys and women there 2 hours before you show up, and they're there 2 hours after you leave. And the actors who act out, and get selfish, generally speaking, I would say it's always motivated by fear. You know, they're in a position where everything's on them and they're scared to death. And, that prompts some difficult behavior from some people. I mean, I worked with Shannon Doherty back in the day. And I got along with her fine, and I'm sorry for her loss. I
Yeah.
really am. But not everybody did.
When I look at your career, because I don't know if you know this or not, when I was scrolling up and down IMDb on Extreme Prejudice and the prominent actors in it, and there's a lot of them. The only one I think of whose picture isn't included is you. And I don't know if that's done by design or not. And when I was looking up your resume, I was blown away by it. I'm like, man, this guy did everything. And I know there's no Academy Award on it. Not that an award is necessarily the standard of success. So I did a whole thing on this. I actually did a TED talk on it, on defining success. And I've been around a lot of guys. You're a New York Giants fan, so you can relate to this. I got to know Bill Parcells a little bit when Bill was the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I was covering the team. And one of the best coaches who ever lived. It was great. And his personal life was a challenge. And I've seen that time and time again. It's these trades that you make. And when I look at your resume, and I realize I'm just looking at a piece of paper on a screen or whatever, I'm like, that guy's a big success in a really hard, cutthroat industry. That's what I see. Do you see that? I hope you do. Do you?
Well, let's just put it this way. I say this every once in a while to Jack, my son,
Mm-hmm.
and Karen, my wife, and Connor, my other son. I have no regrets. I really don't. I love to watch other actors now. I have no sense of jealousy. It's really foreign to me now. I love to see people give an effort and do the best work they can. I'm a good audience member. I I'm greatly relieved because I don't just convince myself. I know that I got an opportunity in theater, on film, and in television to do my best work, and I was able to do that. You know, I wasn't everything I was in was not great, far from it, but I know that I was able to lay down a performance or two in film, on television, in the theater, especially in the theater, um, that I don't think I could have done better. I don't think I could have done it better. I gave everything I had, and I was good as I was literally capable of being, you know? Um, and that's how I feel about it, you know? And I know a lot of actors finish up and they don't feel that way. You know? Like, I never laid down the performance in a film that made me go, okay, if I don't get to do it again, I did it. Or you know, on a sitcom, or you know, on stage, you know, and those are the actors that I think are vulnerable to those thoughts, you know, those demons. So I consider myself fortunate in that way.
Did you at any point understand that there was not necessarily any correlation between good and financial success? That you can see people on screen who ain't that good. I can think of a few who ain't that good, but they're in a project that hits, and then they go on a run and make a bunch of money, and they're secure for a little while. And then other people out there who are a hell of a lot better can't catch a break and catch on with a project like that, and they don't have the kind of success. That's the way I've read it. Am I right or wrong on that?
Yeah, you know, I think you're right. You know, and that kind of stuff can eat you alive.
Oh, absolutely.
And you know, I think I was always pretty good about it. I was mostly hard on myself, way too hard on myself. But uh, you know, um, I like I just said, felt relief and relative peace about my career when I left. And I knew a lot of actors who I knew were really, you know, there was a lot of self-hatred going on, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. Because acting, it's like once you start to do it and you start to get some jobs, and it's like, I got a career.
Yeah.
You know, most actors, right? They just watch that ship sail over the horizon. You know, it's like, there goes my career. You know, and you know it. You've been around long enough, and you're like, I'm not getting auditions for A-list films anymore. That happened to me, and I was like, why not? I was like, you know, why not? You know, you did a sitcom for 4 years, and nobody wants to cast you in, you know, a dramatic role in an A-list film. It could happen. The thing is, LA is choked with actors and actresses who they're just hanging on. You know, they're hanging on. They're just believing, like, you know, if I can just get in front of the right person, and
Right.
God bless them, you know. But if there's anything that I do think about in retrospect is I wish I hadn't given so much of my soul to the industry. I'm happy,
Define that. You gotta explain that.
you know. I mean, I, 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 I gave my soul to the art form, and that I'll never regret. I just wish I hadn't been so emotionally connected to the hierarchy of how I thought about myself or how the industry thought about me when I was in it, because that's a waste of time. I mean, it's really a waste of time, you know, and it's time that you can never get back. So the entertainment industry does not deserve anybody's love. Okay, it deserves your professionalism. It deserves your full focus and attention when you do get an opportunity. But there's not a lot of soul there, you know, out in LA, and even to a certain extent in New York, although I think there's more of it in the theater community. But I wish I hadn't been such an unrequited lover, you know, for so much of my 30-year career in terms of how I was doing in the industry.
But
And
can you do that and make it in that kind of industry? Because I've heard other actors say that you have to give your soul, and that's an all-encompassing gift. in order to make it. And do you think you can really do it without giving up that part of you that is so important that you can't recognize until, I don't want to say it's too late, but you've already made that decision?
You know, I can't go back and get in my head 30 years ago or 15 years ago, but I just know that when I did it, there was no plan B. You know, I was like, I didn't go on vacations with my family. I cut vacations short early. I disappointed people, friends. No, I have this audition. No, I have to prepare for this meeting. No, no, no. And I said no to a lot of life. You know, I don't have a lot of regrets about the attention I gave to my kids growing up because I I I tried very hard to do that as well as I could. Um, but you know, actors they have a mistress, and it's the business. You know, and you give it all your love, and you give it all your time, and you give it all your money, and the vast majority of it is unrequited for the vast majority of actors. So you know, it can be great. It can be so much fun. It can be so satisfying. You can connect with so many interesting people and go interesting places, but it's always good to keep in mind that it doesn't love you back.
Okay, so I've got a couple more things. I'll let you go. This has been great. You deliberately went a hard right turn away from theater, and then you go into academia, where you become a professor of history at Fordham in New York City. That's a pretty big that's a pretty big turn. What prompted you to say, okay, I'm done, and I'm going to go be a professor of history?
Well, I literally took my Screen Actors pension 10 years early at 55, and I got out for, you know, a number of reasons that I won't go into too much here. Um, One of the biggest ones was that I was done. I was really tired of the life. I was tired of the uncertainty. I was tired of the judgment system and feeling bad about myself if I wasn't doing great, you know. And when I got out, I spent about 3, 4 years just. My wife was like, "Well, you got to get a job," you know. So so I did, and what I found out is nobody cares. You know, I must have sent out 500 resumes. Over those 4 years, I got about 3 or 4 minimum wage jobs. The last job I had before I applied to City College in Manhattan and got in to get the master's in history, I was working the overnight shift at FedEx. I was loading and unloading trucks at night with Jack, which I'm really happy that he joined me on that job because now he knows what it's like to work, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and then I, you know, I realized, whatever, I'm 58. Um, you know, I don't golf. What am I going to do? You know, what am I going to do? And I started thinking about it. And, you know, I had always been a voracious reader of history. And at a number of points, my wife and kids had said things like, you'd be a good history teacher, I guess, when I talked about the books, you know.
Mhm.
And I ran it by them. I said, I'm trying to get into this master's program. Do you think it makes sense? And they all went, yeah, you know, yeah, okay. So it took me 2.5 years to get that, and then about halfway through that process, I I started thinking if I have a master's, I can teach high school. I don't want to teach high school, so maybe I'll keep this going. Plus, I found, thank God, that I love it, you know, and as challenging as it was and is, I feel so fortunate to have found something besides my first love to do. And yeah, so I'm extremely fortunate to have kind of stumbled into it and then found that it was something that I truly love.
So it's listed on your Fordham page that your areas of interest are global Cold War, diplomatic history, and foreign relations. So I'm going to ask you a history question. This
Shoot.
is right up my alley. So I'm a Cold War era kid. You are too. And as you and I both know, over the last however many years, Ronald Reagan, our now late president, has been given credit for having had the foresight to come up with a plan to essentially win the Cold War against the Soviets.
Mm-hmm.
My personal theory is that they had no, and this is not somebody who dislikes Reagan at all, but this is my own thought on this, and I've wanted to ask a historian this, and you fit the bill. Reagan and his associates and advisors didn't know what they were doing. They had a plan, but the idea that this was done with the idea that they were going to outspend the Soviets into a victory was just fortunate luck. That they really didn't know what they were doing, and they happened to do it. And it happened to work out in their favor. Am I right or wrong?
I think you're right. I really do.
All right.
Well, he was originally a Democrat, right?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
when things started to turn during the second Red Scare, um, he sort of put his finger in the wind, and he was fading as an actor, and he needed a second act, and he was approached by some corporate interests.
That's right.
GE specifically made him their spokesman, and he went around the country giving speeches for GE and speaking mainly in terms of anti-communism and
Right.
joys of capitalism, the advantages of capitalism, and the Republican infrastructure at the highest levels became very attracted to the idea of him as a presidential candidate. Governor tries, doesn't win, then tries again and wins. So he came in with a very sort of limited ideology, which was staunchly anti-communist.
Right.
And he took it away from Jimmy Carter. God bless Jimmy Carter, 100 years old, a greatly undervalued president who's a big part of the dissertation I'm writing. And his ideology was very simple, very muscular. He had a very sunny optimism about the prospects of the United States. And he went at the Soviet Union differently than his predecessors did, going back to Nixon, who created détente with Henry Kissinger, which was to lower the temperature on relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, make the relationship workable so that we weren't always at, DEFCON 1 and threatening each other. Reagan took the opposite track, and his idea was to pressure the Soviet Union. I think there was a lot to be said for that. Having said that, I think the scholarship now is pretty definitive that he did not win the Cold War. He contributed to it. He had the United States on an adversarial stance with the Soviet Union, but really the demise of the Soviet Union was principally about their inability in terms of the architecture of their economy to continue to compete in a global marketplace. And by the time Gorbachev came to power and he tried to introduce some market ideas to keep the Russian economy alive, the Soviet economy alive, it was too late. It was too burdened with bureaucracy and leaders of the agricultural sector versus the military sector versus, et cetera, all protecting their fiefdoms. It was a series of oligarchies, and he couldn't crack the code, and it collapsed. So I do think, honestly, that he contributed to it. Yes, he took an adversarial stance, which poked it closer to the edge of the cliff. But I think you're largely right. It was mostly just kind of an ideology and a kind of a general thrust to be anti-Soviet, anti-communist. That's my sense of it anyway.
All right, last one. What are your favorite films about history? Since I'm a history nerd, I'm the guy who reads books about submarines. I'm that guy. So what are your favorite movies about history?
Well, I'm teaching the Vietnam Wars for the second semester. The first 3 semesters I taught, this is my third year teaching, I did a course called The History of Race and Ethnicity in the United States. And one of the films that I showed was Glory.
Oh,
And
that's a great movie.
Glory, Broderick, I remember him doing it, being an actor, auditioning for it, not getting another part in that movie. But it's good. It's very accurate. They get a couple things wrong, but nothing really important. It's a very good film that shows all kinds of things: race relations, white on black, black on black. It shows the difference between the northern soldiers who come down in the 54th Regiment and the local black militias, and some sort of disconnect between people who were slaves and went to war on behalf of the Union and people who joined the Union Army from the North. It gets a lot of things right. Other history movies, oh my gosh. Well, history. All the President's Men is a history movie, and it's one of my favorite movies. I can watch that over and over again. It's one of only. Reds is another great history movie. Warren Beatty. Long, but I always talk it up to my students. If you want to get a sense of what the first Red Scare was like in the 20s, and the first time the United States felt under threat by what at the time seemed like a very compelling ideology. Right. Everybody the same. We don't have gender differences. We're all workers. Let's unite against the capitalists, and how that was so threatening to the United States and to the administration of Woodrow Wilson and this writer, John Reed, who went on to write 10 Days That Shook the World. That's a great history film, Reds. And I've got 10 others, but that's it.
I probably could have held you here hostage for another 5 weeks, but I know you have a life, a job, wife, and children, even though you're trying to shoo them out into the world. I can't thank you enough for this. I have been very fortunate to interview a lot of interesting people, and this is way up the list. You did not have to do it. This was extremely kind of you to give me your time and your story. Thank you very, very much. I'll send you a check. Just don't cash it.
Don't cash it, right. Well, listen, Mac, I appreciate you reaching out. I've never done this before. Like I said to you in an email, I don't know who will care, but I love talking with you. And I've been following you a little bit. I've getting to know a little bit about you. And even though you're a Cowboys fan, you seem
I wouldn't say I'm a fan. I would say I didn't grow up here, but I've lived here for a long time. So when I moved here, the Cowboys went into the toilet. And I've noticed that you're a New York sports fan. You said you're a Giants fan. And Michael Strahan, you know who Mike Strahan is. Michael Strahan took and admonished Giants fans recently, which is, hey, man, you got 2 Super Bowls wins in not a too short a time. That's pretty good. Quit your complaining. But are you a Yankees or a Mets guy?
I'm a Mets guy. I'm a hardcore Mets guy. I haven't been tuned into this season, to be honest. My son Jack is a Knicks fan, so he's got really back into basketball, and we went to a bunch of games last year. So I've been veering more towards basketball. But I'm really pleased that the Mets are in it. I was with my wife at Game 7 of the '86 series. We saw them win it.
You're kidding.
Unbelievable. Yeah. We watched Game 6 in the bathroom of my apartment on Hell's Kitchen, and we ran out screaming into the streets when Jesse Orozco, I don't know who threw the pitch in Game 6, and my wife's father had tickets to the Monday game, but he had some conflict. He gave them to us, and we went to Game 7, saw them win the '86 series. So yeah, Mets fan.
Wow, what a great so you remember watching and listening to Vince Scully's call behind the bag, "Here Comes Night," and the Mets win it?
Oh man, and also poor Bill Buckner. My God, do to each other what we do to human beings in sport. Oh my God, it's awful. And he was able to go back to Fenway with tears in his eyes and have them welcome him back. But fans shouldn't do that. They shouldn't do that.
I felt awful.
For years. What a great player. Anyway.
Did you ever see the Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm episode with Bill Buckner?
I haven't seen it. I heard about it.
Oh, it's great because they lionize, but you've got to see it. But Buckner had a great sense of humor about it, and by that point, obviously, everybody had put it behind them. But if you get a chance, Matt, as a sports fan, as someone who appreciates theater and drama and narratives, you've got to see that episode.
I'll check it out for sure.
Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, give me a call if you come up this way, and
I will.
Have a lunch or a dinner, and same if I come down to Texas.
Love it, Matt. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.
Appreciate it.
Yep.